we're asking you to not share anything that you don't want made public. You should have a pop-up on your screen that's asking you to acknowledge that this is meeting is being recorded and you are agreeing to go with that. So welcome everyone. We have a full agenda and we will keep moving. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are here to hear from you, and we are using the chat to gather comments, gather questions that we will then put into the listening log, which has, you'll find out in a few minutes, some huge amount of information that we've already gotten. And so we are using it. So you can get the slides from the for this presentation, and the link is on your screen. If you're listening by phone or even in the webinar, you can press 6 to unmute yourself, 6 to mute yourself again. I will be using the speakers queue at times, so I'll be calling for names for people to enter themselves into the queue. You can again use the chat to give us a comment. You don't have to give a comment verbally, but you can. I will be gathering names, and as time allows, I will be taking those names to get comments. We may not always have time for everyone who's in the queue, as we have a lot to cover. So again, if you raise your hand to make a comment and we can't get to it, then please do make sure you put it in the chat. You can press *9 on your phone to raise your hand in the webinar. Otherwise, the icon will be at the bottom of your screen. You go to the reactions button, click on that, and then there's a little box for you to raise your hand, or I presume to lower your hand if you want to change your mind about that. There is closed captioning. You can get the live transcript icon at the bottom of your screen, and you have the link there to our page for meeting information. Next slide, please. So again, we're recording. Please do be cognizant of sharing any personal or protected health information that you are choosing to share. Make sure it's what you want to be sharing. Thank you so much for that. Next slide, please. And at each juncture in the meeting, we will have a specific amount of time for questions and ideas. So we may come to the end of that time before everyone who wants to communicate to us verbally can do that, but again, you can use the chat. So next slide, please. Okay, so the speaker's queue is simply, again, that I will stop and ask for names, and you will give me your name at that time, either raising your hand in the queue, and then I will go through that list in the order that I receive them. I'll do my very best to do that perfectly without errors, but I will tell you that I'm just human and sometimes I may get it a little backwards. So when you're called on, please identify the section of the regulations that you're addressing. And you can check the listening log to make sure that we have captured correctly and accurately what you have said to us. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. We are going to use a timer, which I'll be keeping 2 minutes per comment. I will give you a shout out when 15 seconds remain, and we'll be sticking very, very closely to this time so that as many people have time to speak as possible. If you agree with someone's comments, you can put in the chat, I ditto Mary's comments, for example. It doesn't mean that you have to repeat all of those comments if you're simply agreeing with them, and that is important. We do want to know when people agree. But again, being efficient time-wise, all the ideas are going to be added to the listening log. We do have an issues for further discussion log for comments that are unrelated to the rule topic we're addressing at that point. And we will have additional meetings if we don't get through everything in this process that we need to get through in the number that we have set up so far. So next slide, please. Okay, so we are doing the introduction, housekeeping, and so on right now. We are covering rules and regulation changes for case management redesign, goals for the rule updates, roles and responsibilities, and then we are doing the rule review later in the meeting, and we are wrapping up then. Tiffany or Nicolette, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to say about the agenda before we move forward.
Thanks, John. Actually, if I can jump in real fast. Thank you for running through the ground rules. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Amanda Lofgren, the Case Management and Quality Performance Division Director, and just wanted to take a few moments this morning to acknowledge and just say thank you on behalf of the department for the time you're investing in joining us through this process. I know I see some similar faces from our previous meetings. We did take a little bit of a break over the holidays and this new kind of the first part of this year, because there's just so many efforts underway across the department, and really just wanting to make sure that we have the space and allow for the time needed to prepare for today and the subsequent meetings that we'll have. John, thanks for laying the groundwork and kind of the ground rules, and also just remind folks that this is a space too where just really ask for respectful conversations and acknowledging like we're not all going to agree on all things, but that this is a space for sharing ideas and also hearing all different perspectives, because this is a large lift for us and a large amount of work going forward. And you're in good hands with Tiffany leading this effort. She's been working closely with others across the department and our leadership team to prepare for today and the work that's going forward. So just thank you for your time. And Tiffany, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tiffany Domikos. I'm the Case Management Redesign Policy Advisor. Thank you, John, for your introduction and for your help with our facilitation. So agenda for today is pretty simple. We are going to do some introduction this morning, first thing. So we might go past that 15-minute mark because I want to give you some background on the rule process and some follow-up from previous meetings. And then we'll move into the case management agency rule review. We will do as much as we can. Our intent is to get through all of our case management agency responsibilities today. But if we don't do that, then we will pick that back up in 2 weeks. We will pause around 10:45 to do any kind of wrap up that we need to, answer any final questions, and talk about next steps and where to find more information. And then we will adjourn around 11 o'clock. So welcome, let's dig in. So I want to start with talking about the purpose of these meetings. So really we're here today to share the draft rules with stakeholders and for the department to gather feedback about those. These meetings are about the rules and their structure, so we're going to try to stay focused on those things. We will log requests for policy changes, but we aren't able to manage that process of policy change in these meetings. The OCL team is working really hard to make sure you all are heard and your feedback is documented and the department's responses are documented as well. We'll put those links in the chat for where you can find those listening logs. Next slide, please. So our rule process, these are kind of the basics of our rulemaking process. So first, subject matter experts at the department draft a new rule structure or language. And for our purposes today, our updates align with case management redesign. Then HCPF brings those drafts to our stakeholders for your review. Subject matter experts and our leadership incorporate those approved updates as it aligns with the necessary authorities. And then we take drafts for approval through our e-clearance process that includes program integrity, OCL leadership, HCPF leadership, budget, and legal. And then we have our final draft to send to the Medical Services Board. Next slide, please. So the Medical Services Board is the group that reviews and approves all rules in Colorado. There is a portion of that process that requires stakeholder feedback and public comment. But in OCL, we tend to bring our changes and updates forward to our stakeholders prior to that process, because we want to make sure that you will have your questions answered, your concerns addressed before those public meetings happen. So for this particular rule revision process, we are going to be meeting with the Medical Services Board early before our first hearing to really just explain the structural changes. We're going to provide some orientation and some tools for them to be able to find where things have been moved, which will also be available to the public during public comment. We'll present final drafts and then do that public comment process to get that approval. We're aiming for January 2024 for our final approval and for those rules to be in effect. I know that timeline has changed a little bit. We were hoping for earlier in the fall, and because of some of the delays with our technology pieces, we can't write rules for things that we don't know the process for. So things have just been moved back a little bit, but we're hoping for January 2024. Next slide, please. So our basic timeline, October 2022 through June 2023, is when we are coming to you all as stakeholders with these updates and changes, the structural changes. We'll have a final draft version completed and through clearance by September, and we'll do our initial presentation to the Medical Services Board in September. We'll have our public comment rule review will be done in October of this year, and then we'll have our Medical Services Board hearing in November, and then again, final rule adoption in January. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a review, but want to make clear again, just kind of why we're here. So currently our rule structure is very fragmented. We have pieces of rules and direction kind of all over the place in our rules. And what we have heard from members, from providers, from case management agencies and advocates over lots of years is this is really confusing and it's really hard to find what you need. So we are attempting to do a reorganization. Next slide, please. So our new rule structure, we start with waiver and program overall requirements. We have CMA requirements, CCP requirements, service definitions, and provider definitions. This is still a work in progress. So you'll hear from us today about some changes that we are going to be asking you all for input on around where to place things that seems to make the most sense to us, but want to get your input on. So this is our proposed structure that is, like I said, still kind of a work in progress. Next slide, please. So through this, these rule updates and through this process, what we're really looking for is the reduction of duplication and removing areas of the rules that are obsolete, that are not applicable for case management agencies or home and community-based services anymore. We're hoping to clarify case management, provider, and member roles and responsibilities, and really hoping to put all of this into a structure that's easy to follow and easy to understand. As was mentioned earlier, there will be a listening log that is currently posted on our website and is updated live during our meetings. You can see previous answers and questions and answers and responses from the department, and we will continue to do that throughout this process. If you ever can't make a meeting, you're always welcome to email myself or Nicolette, and we're happy to add your comments and questions to the listening logs. Next slide, please. So in some cases, we're looking for feedback on specific changes. Does this language communicate what we are looking for? In other times, we're looking for feedback on the actual restructure. So as I mentioned earlier, we're still kind of working through that process of what makes the most sense as far as flow for the structure. And when we're looking at that, we're asking the questions of, is this a logical place? Is any of this language out of date? Are there any errors that need to be cleaned up? Is there better plain language that we can use? We're not able to do a lot of substantive changes to the intent of rules. It's really just to bring the rules in alignment with current direction, current policies, and current authorities. Next slide, please. So through that process, we are having these meetings every other week from now until the end of June. And for these meetings, we want to be really clear about what our roles are. So myself, Nicolette, my teammate, and John Barry are doing kind of this introduction. We are also monitoring and moving conversations forward. Nicolette will walk through the rule changes, and I will help with timekeeping, as is John. We're monitoring questions in the queue and really just looking at the kind of flow of the meeting and making sure that we have SMEs, subject matter experts, here to answer any questions. Our HCPF subject matter experts are those who are addressing questions, concerns, and comments as they relate to the updates or the specific area that we are reviewing, and can help give some more background of the intent of what is trying to be communicated to help us kind of flesh out if what has been proposed makes sense. And then we have our contractors, HCBS Strategies. They are doing a lot of the behind the scenes. So they're record keeping for all of the listening logs, the issues for further discussion. They're making sure that we have timely follow-up and assisting with walking through any of the rule changes. They're doing research for us on the back end. And then they're recording any of the questions, comments, and follow-up that the department has. Next slide, please. So we'll drop this, if somebody could drop this listening log link into the chat, that would be great. When you open this, we have 135 lines and counting. I believe we've only had 4 meetings, three or four meetings. So thank you so much for all of your involvement and engagement with this. It's really important. This is a team effort across the state. We need everyone's brains to help us make sure that we're getting this right. So really appreciate everyone's input. I believe we have most of those lines answered from department staff. And if not, there are only a handful that are still missing. So yeah, next slide is our second log. And this is the issues for further discussion. So this one is for issues where we might need more policy discussion about those particular pieces. And so that's where we log the issue, and if there are other meetings that are addressing that issue, and if not, then the department is scheduling time and providing a response of when that will be discussed. Any questions about kind of the structure of these meetings, the rule revision process? Okay. Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to move forward because we do still have quite a bit to get through before we get to the actual rules. Next slide. So our last meeting in January was about member rights and responsibilities. And we heard some feedback about, where are these going to be placed? We don't want it to be fragmented. These should apply to all of the rules that come after it. And so we had some proposed changes that we want to bring to you all today. So we would like to propose to place the member rights and responsibilities at the beginning of the HCBS rules, to emphasize its importance. So that means that before the waiver rules even start, that we would put members' rights and responsibilities. The case manager section then, and all of the sections after that would reference back to those rights and responsibilities and state that, you know, case managers or providers are responsible for protecting and respecting those rights. So we're going to do a quick poll. I hope that makes sense. But our poll is if you are in support or not of member rights and responsibilities being the first thing that happens in our home and community-based services rules. If you are in support of that, you would say yes. If you are not in support of that and you'd like it to be integrated throughout, then you would say no. So I will give everyone a minute to say yes or no. Got about 75 people respond. We're slowing down a little bit. All right. A couple more seconds. All right, last call for a response, yes or no, in support of putting the member rights and responsibilities at the beginning of our HCBS rules. Okay. We will go ahead and end the poll. Great. Looks like we have about 95% of people in support of that. So great. Thank you so much for your help and your response. All right. So let's go to the next slide. All right. So for today's review, we're going to be talking about case management. And as you saw in the previous structure, we are starting with case management agency responsibilities. So today's review will be going over definitions, legal bases, case management agency defined service areas, and case management agency overall requirements. The case management agency selection and contracting, that includes the procurement process and the case management agency contract and disputes between department. I'll talk about the contract pieces in a minute and kind of the difference between contract and rule and provider agreements. But what I just want to say ahead of time, what you're going to see is that it is very it is very simple language because there is a whole other section of rules and requirements for contracting that we don't want to ever be in conflict with. And so we are referring back to those rules because those are the rules that will be updated if there are ever changes legally for the state of Colorado. Next slide. So the case management agency overall requirements are hefty. There is a lot that is encompassed here. The goal was to have a kind of high level overview of what a case management agency is responsible for, and then a second section with what a case manager job actually is, what their day-to-day responsibilities are. We'll talk here in a minute about combining those. As the SMEs kind of worked through all of those rules, what we found was that, you know, we're kind of duplicating things. We're talking about monitoring in the case management agency responsibilities, and then we're talking about it again with the case manager responsibilities. We're talking about intake and eligibility in the case management agency responsibilities, and we're talking about it again in the case manager roles and responsibilities. And so our question is, do we want to go ahead and combine those? And then moving forward, we would have all of those together. For today's purposes, we are just going to do the case management agency overall requirements. which will include administration of a case management agency. CMA is case management agency for anyone who needs that translation. I know we kind of speak in acronyms, and I try really hard not to do that. CMA, the governing body, so that would be like a board of directors or things like that. A community advisory committee, the CMA grievance process, personnel system, staffing patterns, the case management agency communication and documentation, record keeping, confidentiality, preservation of member rights, member access to the case management agency, incident reporting, and then mistreatment, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Next slide. So what you'll see in the rules is the combining of the current single entry point and CCB requirements for case management. So currently, for those of you who don't know, we have CCB requirements, we have single entry point requirements. Case management redesign brings those systems together. And so our job in the rules is to make sure that we are keeping the pieces that we want to keep in our system and that we have authority to keep in our system, and cutting the pieces that we don't. So this includes the governing body, the service areas and contracting, the case management agency functions, the grievances, personnel and staffing, and then the Human Rights Committee, critical incidents, and mistreatment. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tangent because I think this might answer some of the questions before they are asked. Excuse me. So rules really define what must be or must not be done by all case management agencies to comply with mandatory guidelines, but they don't necessarily have all of the requirements of a case management agency, because some of those live in the provider agreements and some live in the contracts and some live in the rules. The contracts are the legal agreements between the department and the case management agency. So this includes standard boilerplate requirements for all contracts, literally all contracts that the state of Colorado does. The specific details and timeframes for each activity and deliverable, reimbursement and handling of funding, action steps for compliance. It refers to the rules and waiver requirements, federal requirements, and other things that the contractor must adhere to. Provider agreements are also legal agreements between the department and the case management agency. And these are specific to targeted case management requirements, to TCM timelines, those reimbursements for those activities that are billed through the Colorado interchange by the case management agency. So TCM requirements for the CMAs are only found within the department rules. So a large portion of our rules for HCBS refer to activities billed for TCM. You'll also see language in our rules that say something like, in alignment with most recent department training and communication. That gives us some flexibility to shift and change direction as the system evolves and as our requirements get a little more sophisticated and a little more detailed. Next slide, please. So CMAs are paid either through the contract or through targeted case management. Targeted case management requires a provider enrollment, and contracts are done between the department and case management agencies who are selected through the RFP. Contract payments include pre-enrollment activities, and the CMA must enter those required case management information into the department's system, and then the department pulls reports for the department's from the system to process those payments for these activities. So this includes things like appeals, critical incidents, human rights committee, waiting list, 100.2, SIS assessments, things like that. Other activities that, so there are other activities that require the CMA to actually send an invoice for reimbursement. That includes the ICAP assessments and expedited DD determination testing. There are deliverable-based payments that are paid through the contract, and once reviewed by the department, then payment is made. You'll see those in the contracts as things like operations guide, long-range plan, committee updates, continuous quality improvement, etc. State general fund is kind of its own thing, and so I'm going to skip that for now. But TCM is for eligible HCBS members and is billed by the CMA and reimbursed directly through the Colorado interchange. What that means is that the case management agency acts as a provider and actually bills in the same way that a provider does. This includes ongoing case management, monitoring, and rural travel add-ons. Ongoing case management can be billed for 1 unit each month for each member. And then there is a monitoring that can be billed up to the allowable limit. We have rural travel add-ons that have that are allowed for certain case management agencies, and case management agencies are required to have detailed documentation about all of these activities. So I take you on that tangent to tell you it is a little complicated to figure out where to find what case management agencies are responsible for. So what our rules really focus on is that ongoing case management and monitoring. There's a lot that goes into that ongoing case management rate. And so you'll see some things with more detail in that section. So things like service planning, things like provider selection, more details around monitoring, those kinds of things. So again, I'm telling you all of this because I want you to have kind of in your mind that the contract reimbursement, all of those details are not always in our rules. And so you may not see all of those details in these rules. If we say, oh, that's in the contract, this is why. Make sense? Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Great. So changes that you'll see again the new structure, which we'll do a little poll on here in a second. You'll see a difference between member and individual. So individual is someone who is not yet enrolled in services, and member is someone who is enrolled, has been approved for services. Case management agency or CMA will replace single entry point and community center board wherever that's applicable for case management responsibilities. And the rest of the rules are really aligning with our contract waiver and statute requirements in as much as is possible to put in our rules. So we have targeted case management versus administrative case management. We have our community advisory committee, grievance and complaints, case management agency exceptions process, coordination with community partners, and our timelines that will reflect what's in the waiver requirements. Next slide, please. All right, so here's our poll. So the question is, should we separate case management agency overall requirements from the case manager requirements section? So our current draft has separated these to clarify the agency versus individual case manager responsibilities. And, the distinctions are a little bit blurry and maybe creating duplication where we don't want to. So we want to get your feedback on integrating these into a single section. So Nicolette's going to put a poll up here. And our question is, I recommend either one, integrating the case management agency and case manager requirements, or keeping them as separate sections. Got about 65 people, 70 people answered. Give it another minute or two. So again, this is asking if you would like to pull and integrate the case management agency requirements and responsibilities with the case manager requirements and responsibilities, or second, if you'd like to keep them as separate sections. Got about 90 people who answered. We'll give a last call for a response. Anybody else? Okay, we'll go ahead and end the poll. And we've got a pretty even match, 44% versus 56%. Okay, thank you so much for your feedback. If you have other questions or comments about that, you can email me. You can put your comment in the chat, or you can email Nicolette. Okay, that is enough of me talking, and we can get into the actual rules that we are here to talk about. So I will hand it over to you, Nicolette.
Okay, sorry, just getting organized here so I can go through these with everybody. I'm also going to place this in the chat, the document that I'm going to be reading through. Okay, so what we're going to be going over is what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be reading kind of verbatim any of the changes that we see coming out, and we will know if they are changes based upon this kind of system that we have here. So any kind of major revisions will be in blue. If you are colorblind or you have issues with being able to differentiate the colors, then you will see any kind of major revisions through these backslash little marks here. Anything that is kind of a combined or moved or similar language, like maybe we took it out of another section and we've just moved it into our new section. Maybe there's just very similar language. We're trying to make it more person-centered, things like that, but it's still the basic concept. We're going to have that in green, and it will also be between the braces. These are the little braces here. Anything that you see that's outdated, reference that is going to be removed for the rules, you're just going to see a big red slash going through it with the red markings. And then anything that's an outdated reference to be updated, this is going to be in between our brackets right here. And this is something that we're still going to be looking at and updating. And so that is in red right there. Areas requiring further review, you're going to see as a grayed out. Okay, All right, so without further ado, I'm also going to only read the areas of change. So where you see those different brackets, braces, or colors, I'm just going to be reading through those. Everything else is something that's already here. It's stayed, something that's been brought over. And I'm going to pause at every page for questions. And yes, if you have comments at the end of each page, you can raise your hand and John will put you in the queue. Okay, so here we go. The new section that we have that we're starting for these case management rule revisions and case management agency requirements is 8.7200.1, Colorado Case Management System. Anytime you see this, you'll just see where we are pulling it from, an old rule. So the Colorado Case Management System consists of a case management agencies representing defined service areas throughout the state. When we say defined service areas, you may have heard catchment areas prior. We're kind of changing that language over and you'll just now be hearing defined service areas. For the purposes of providing assistance to persons in need of long-term care services and support. And that is really it for the changes in that first section. Any questions? That's our first page. Not a lot there. Thank you, John.
Oh. Folks, I put it in the chat, but you can either at this point, when we ask for questions, you can raise your hand in the webinar. You go down to the bottom, the reactions button, click that, and you can see where it says to raise your hand, or you can type your name in the chat. For example, I would put John for the Q, and you can just use the letter Q. Or if you're on the phone only, you can unmute right now, *6. Give me your name.
Great. All right, we'll get into more of the meat of it here. Did you want me to pause a little longer, John? Did you have something else? Oh, we're good.
Hearing none, seeing none so far, we're good. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we are going to go into the definitions, and here's where you'll see a lot of the green, meaning it's just either small language changes or it's been pulled from another section and brought into this section of the rule. Case management agency shall be as defined in section 8.7101. Case management agency defined service area means no one or more counties that have been designated as a geographic region in which one agency serves as the case management agency for persons in need of home and community-based waiver services or other long-term services and support. Case management activities shall be as defined in sections 8.7101. Community Center Board, or CCB, means a private, for-profit, or nonprofit organization that is an administrator of local generated funding pursuant to the statute, and I won't read out all of the numbers for everybody, and acts as a resource for persons with an intellectual and developmental disability or a child with a developmental delay. Conflict-free case management means a case management service and activities provided to a member enrolled in a home and community-based service waiver by an entity other than the entity providing direct long-term care services and supports, except as otherwise allowed. Conflict-free case management waiver means a case management agency is granted the allowance to provide both case management activities and direct care services. Agencies must apply and be approved for this waiver prior to receiving intent to award for case management agency request for proposal in the current contract period. And that is it for that page with definitions that I've read out. And we are ready to take questions.
Okay, this is John again. So again, if you have a question, or comment, you can raise your hand in the webinar. See one so far, thank you. You can type your name in the chat, or if you're on the phone only right now, you can unmute *6 and give me your name. I'm listening for that for a sec. Hearing none. Nicolette, we have 2 people. Michelle, go first, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is in regards to the specific verbiage for conflict-free case management. In this definition and this verbiage, yes, exactly there, has been used in the past, but my question is how the department plans to actually enforce or have the checks and balances. The whole idea of conflict-free case management is that that case management agency does not also provide direct services or have any financial interest in an agency that provides direct services. Unfortunately, there are currently agencies that do have this conflict within their services that are being provided to members. And I was hoping to see that with conflict-free case management moving forward, that would be terminated.
Great. Hi, Michelle. This is Tiffany. I can try to take that question. I want to clarify what your question is. You said that the language is for conflict-free case management is a little confusing. I see some comments in the chat to that end also. And then you had a question about how the department is enforcing conflict-free case management.
I don't, thank you for responding. I don't think that the question is so much that the verbiage is confusing, but I think if I simplify the question, it's how is this going to be policed? How is this going to be enforced? Because to this point, even moving forward with this RFP process and subcontracting and whatnot, to the best of my knowledge, this is still not being enforced.
Yeah, so we will put that on our issues for further discussion. Again, this is not a place to really talk about the enforcement of things, rather what is communicated in the rules. So I hear what you're saying about wanting to understand the process of conflict-free case management, what that looks like on the ground. I think we'll get into that in the rules. These are just the definitions. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I just think that maybe the definition then needs to be more direct, because I think as some providers and some members would read this and not fully understand what conflict-free case management really means. Okay. So maybe something to kind of take back that, how can we really lay this out in terms that are understood by not just providers that are reading rules and regulations all the time, but also for members that are utilizing those services.
Great. Thanks for that comment, Michelle. We will take that back.
Thank you. Nancy Vigil, you're up next.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Tiffany. Tiffany, just a quick question on the case management agency definition. I noticed that it says at the end, just for a person in the need of home and community-based waiver services or other long-term services and supports. The other long-term service and supports, is the definition there referring to non-HCBS waiver or non-HCBS programs and state general funds?
I believe it is.
Just thinking maybe clarify that a little bit, because I don't know if the public would understand and community-based waiver services or long-term services and supports.
Thanks, Nancy. We do have a definition for long-term services and supports that's coming up, but we'll be sure to note that. Okay. Thank you. I think we have time for one more on this page.
Okay, we have Lori in the queue. Lori, thank you.
Thanks, John. I put a question in the chat, but I think I'd rather ask it live. We oftentimes have people who live in one place, their agency is headquartered somewhere else, their case management agency is somewhere else. And so I really want to understand in this defined service area for a case management agency, looking at it from the individual's point of view, is my case management agency determined by where I'm currently living, determined by where the residential agency is located? What's it determined by, so that I really understand what that service area means and where I fit?
Yeah, so that is actually in the rules. Again, these are just the definitions. So we'll get there. If we get there, Lori, and your question isn't answered, will you raise your hand and ask again, please?
You can count on it. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Lori. All right, let's go to the next page.
Okay. Defined service area means the geographical area determined by the State Department to be served by a case management agency. Individual means a person seeking a referral, assessment, or potential enrollment in HCBS or Medicaid prior to their approval of eligibility. This definition will be updated in 7101.1, and this section will reference that section.
Just to call out real quick that 7101 is the waiver section that we've already done one of these meetings or a couple of these meetings for.
Yes, thank you. Good call out. We did not have the numbering yet in those when we went over those, so great. Yeah. And case management agency, again, another one, just because it used to be either CCB or SEP, is now case management agency. Okay, so here's some new language. Legally authorized representative means a person with legal authority to represent an individual in a particular matter. Such a person may be that parent of a minor, the parent of a minor, the court-appointed guardian of an individual only with respect to matters within scope of and in the manner authorized by the guardianship order, or anyone granted authority pursuant to any other type of court order or voluntary appointment or designation. Examples: conservator, agent under power of attorney, member of a supportive community in connection with and supported decision-making agreement, or an LTSS, long-term service support designated representative under then a new site, only with respect to matters within the scope of and in the manner authorized by the court order or voluntary appointment or designation. In situations arising under subsections B and C, the applicant court order or court order or voluntary appointment or designation must be consulted to determine whether it is still in effect, whether it covers the matter in question, and what manner of representation it authorizes. For example, only to receive information or also to communicate the individual's decision, to make decisions on behalf of the individual, and or to take other actions. Long-term services and supports shall be as defined in section 8.7101, long-term services and supports, level of care, eligibility, determination screen, level of care screen means a comprehensive evaluation. This one I think that carries on to the next page. So I'll just finish this section and do questions. Means a comprehensive evaluation with individuals seeking support and appropriate collaterals, such as family members, friends, or caregivers, to determine an applicant or member's eligibility for long-term services and supports based on their need for institutional level of care as determined using the department's prescribed assessment instrument as outlined in section 8.401. Then we're going to pause there for questions.
Okay, thank you. So folks, again, can enter your name in the speakers queue and put the instructions in the chat again. You can raise your hand in the webinar. You can type your name in the chat. You can unmute your phone. I'm not sure if Maureen Welch is still with us. She asked to be in the queue and move to her phone. Maureen, are you there? We'll have to come back to that.
Can you hear me?
So again, folks. Oh, there you are. Yes, Maureen, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still on my computer. I was trying to get it on my phone, but no one was letting me join. So I'll make my comment quick, then I have to run. So I'm concerned about the, I want to make sure that we're a little bit more clear about the supported decision-making agreement. And I'm not sure if you could perhaps reference the statute there so that, you know, community members that are reading these rules can actually see what that means. So if we could add in the citation for the supported decision-making agreement, which is a newer part of our state statute, I think that would help people that are reading this. Also, on the last line of page 3, so the first comment was on legally authorized representative. C, to please expand on the supported decision-making agreement and cite the statute. And then the next comment is on the last line, which is using the word collaterals, services and appropriate collaterals. That sounds very criminal to me. Sounds like something you see on one of those dead body shows. So I'd really prefer to use another term like support people and something less, it sounds very much like they're being accused of abuse or neglect. So if we could just say appropriate people, identified people, such as family members, friends, or caregivers, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you, Maureen. Betty, you're up next.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so families get confused sometimes between the difference between power of attorney and guardianship. To be able to extend your power of attorney to another person, you have to be competent. And guardianship is for people who are deemed incompetent by a court. So does the department, when a family says, well, we have power of attorney, so we can do decision-making here, is the department going to challenge that power of attorney, saying that that means that your the person, your loved one, your family member is competent to assign the power of attorney to you? Will that question ever come up? Because it's a very important distinction legally between guardianship and power of attorney. That's my question. Is there any role for HCPF to challenge somebody's authority over their child because the only legal relationship they have is power of attorney versus guardianship or supported decision-making agreement?
So I don't know that I can answer that question, but I think Kidron, if you want to take a stab at that, I think Kidron can help us understand the intention behind this language, and then maybe that will answer your question, Betty.
Okay.
Sure, and thanks, Betty, for your question. You know, our attempt at having, or the purpose of having these definitions within our rules isn't necessarily to give us parameters to challenge authority for members or their guardians or court-appointed guardians, any of that. It's just our effort to try to define within the rules, and anytime we mention within our rules the roles of what member versus guardian versus appointed authority, etc., like how that plays into the work that case management agencies do and that a case manager does in regard to service planning, etc. So it's really not, again, for us to define any sort of parameters where HCPUF would challenge an authority for supported decision making, etc. It's really just to better define within our definitions where we can tie that back to a definition throughout our rules. So hopefully that helps. The intention is not to have those defined to have any authority or challenge for a member and their support system, however that happens.
Well, if you can still hear me, I have a problem with this, because if you're saying it here that you can have power of attorney and have that authority, if a parent or somebody who has power of attorney is a bad actor on behalf of the person with intellectual disabilities and it's never challenged, that could be very problematic because of the legal relationship isn't really substantial enough to have that authority. So the only time a power of attorney can act for somebody is when that person is incompetent. An incompetent person cannot grant power of attorney. So if you're leaving that in there and saying that, somebody with a power of attorney can be a legally authorized representative, that is not necessarily correct. And I think you need to take a look at that with an attorney who specializes in this area to make sure your language doesn't allow for somebody to do something untoward with insufficient legal authority to do that.
Yeah, so thanks for that further clarification, Betty. And we would agree with you, which is why we have within that definition the words within the scope of the authority given, right? Even guardianship orders in the state of Colorado are specific, that court order, even if somebody has a court appointed guardian, whether it be a family member or a guardian ad litem, within that court order, it has the scope of what authority is given to even a guardian. And so we would look to those types of documents to identify the scope of authority that is included in that document. Not necessarily, oh, I have a piece of paper that says I'm a guardian. That means I make all the decisions for a member that might be needing a guardian for whatever reason that guardianship was appointed. We look to those court documents to say, this is the scope of the authority given in those situations. So hopefully that helps clarify why we have that language in there, and that we're not being prescriptive to say that anybody has a piece of paper that says I'm a guardian, that means I have full authority. We would look to the paper, the court order, to see what is written on there that will direct the team to know what authority is given.
And it's the same with power of attorney. I think
Correct.
It's really important that be highlighted, that because a lot of families are operating off of power of attorney, and that's inappropriate.
Yep, it's what's on that document, and that's why we have in that language within the scope of authority. Absolutely, we agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is John. We have time for two more. So Christina, you're up next.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to clarify, with guardianship, it's capacity, not competency, since we're talking about language and definitions. So it's a person's capacity, not their competency.
Thanks for that, Christina. We will make that update.
Thank you, Christina. Charlene, you're up next.
Yes, thank you. I was just following on with Betty. My concern is that most families don't have any arrangement per se with a loved one. That can particularly happen with developmental disabilities and adults with developmental disabilities. Those families have always relied upon being present during planning processes and so forth. Does this rule mean that those rights need to be redefined in a more formal way? In other words, do families coming into this system need to enter with some sort of defined, written, and signed agreement to be able to help and support, represent their loved one?
So I'm going to jump in and take that question, Charlene. So thank you for that question. We have within the rules of roles and responsibilities, how we want to define that. Again, this is just a definition section to say, this is how we're defining these things. We're in this section, you're not going to see like how a member is supported with developing their what we now call interdisciplinary team. We've got some suggested language to change what we call that, but essentially a member, whether they have an intellectual developmental disability or any other need for support in decision making, et cetera, we want to start with having the conversation with the member about who they want to be part of what I would call their person-centered team, right? We want to have that conversation. The case manager will work with that member and their support system to identify what that looks like. There are times when there are those court-appointed guardians or guardian ad litem or authorized representatives that needs to be taken into consideration, again, within the scope of the authority, right, that those court documents have. But all day long, we want the member to be the center of that discussion, to say, here are the people that I want to support me. So hopefully that answers your question. By no means is this language suggesting that in order to be part of a person-centered team to support a member that you have to have some sort of documented role that's appointed by a court or attorney.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and when we get to that language, let us know if you still have concerns, but all day long, we want it to be person-centered, led by the member and the people that are there to help them make those decisions and be part of their team is the front and center of where we want.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kidron. All right, we're going to jump right back in. Long-term service support designated representative means a person designated by the individual receiving services, by the parent of a minor, or by the guardian of the member receiving services, if appropriate, to assist the individual in acquiring or utilizing long-term services and support. The term encompasses any authorized representative as defined in the statute. They've listed a couple of those out, as well as any authorized representative as defined by another couple of statutes that you can look up if you get bored one night. If the services include consumer-directed attendant support services, CDOS, and or in-home support services, IHSS. And long-term support services designated representative shall have the judgment and ability to assist the individual in acquiring and utilizing the services covered by the designation. The appointment of an LTSS designated representative shall be in writing and shall be subject to the standards set forth in, and these are some of the old rule that we're bringing over that we can reference back to. A long-term service support designated representative who assists an assists an individual in acquiring or utilizing CDOS and/or IHSS shall satisfy the applicable requirements of the statute and the rule relating to representatives for CDOS and/or the requirement of the statute and rule relating to representatives for IHSS, as the case may be. An LTSS designated representative who assists an individual in acquiring or utilizing IHSS may not be a service provider for the individual. For the long-term service support program, what we've brought over in here is complementary and integrative health, HCBS CIH for that update. And level of care screen there for those updates within that definition. And then member means any person enrolled in the state medical assistance program, the Children's Basic Health Plan, HCBS waiver program, or state general funded program. Are there any questions from this page?
This is John again. You can put your, oh, I beg your pardon.
No, that's okay, John. I was just going to say while John does the queue, is that okay if I just jump in and add something that I think might be a question, just as a clarification?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So thanks, everybody. This is Kidron Backus. I just wanted to point out that our definition for long-term support services designated representative, the LTSS designated representative, is really taking, if that all sounds familiar, if you are in a participant directed program mode of service, it looks pretty similar to what we currently refer to as authorized representative. We want to make sure that as we revise these rules, we have an opportunity to clarify any language that can be confusing within our rules. And right now, authorized representative can mean that designated representative for participant directed services. And because we want to make that authorized representative be that legal definition, we also want to make sure that there's not another type of authorized representative within our rules that could be confusing. So you'll see the language that's included here, that long-term services support designated representative, is really changing the language from authorized representative and the requirements of those rules from what we call authorized representative now for those participant directed services. And again, our effort to make sure that it doesn't get confusing. We don't have two types of authorized representatives. Thanks, John.
You bet. So we have 2 people in the queue so far. Again, if anyone is on the phone and wants to give me your name by unmuting, you can do that right now. Excuse me. Elaine, please go ahead.
Hi there. Just real quick, if you look under LTSS program means any of the following, it's not highlighted in green, but I think you've left out the DD waiver. Am I reading that right? You've listed everything but that, I think. So unless I missed it somewhere.
I think you might be right.
Okay, just a note.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you. Julie, you're up next.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted a couple of different maybe points of clarification that might be confusing for some. When you're talking on C here about the long-term supports and services designated rep, can assist an individual in acquiring or utilizing. I just wonder, and this is just a comment, do we want to say part or all you know, as much as, because to me, it is a little confusing. Does that mean they have to be the representative in helping to acquire all of the services and supports, or is it just what the individual would want? And I think maybe that would be a point of clarification. And then the other one was just, you know, I'm kind of back in the old days now. I've realized that I've been here long enough. There was a point in time when an authorized rep had to have known the individual a certain amount of time. And so I don't think that's a thing anymore, but we may want to put something like that just calls that out, that it's no longer that the individual, like the AR used to have to know the individual for at least 2 years. That was a thing way back. So if that's not a thing, maybe it's just a comment for clarification. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Okay, this is John. Anyone else for the queue right now? Okay, Nancy, please go ahead.
Quick question, under LTSS program in the definition, I don't see OBRA under there or state SLS or family support. Is that going to be located under SGF definitions? Sorry.
It is under state general fund definitions.
Okay, sounds good. Another quick question on the level of care screen definition. This is actually where we have to do it in the individual's home, correct?
I believe so. Katrin, well, or Ryan, if you.
Yeah. Nancy, can you repeat that question? Sorry, I heard something in the home. Sorry.
Yeah, Kidron, because I know the level of care screening, we have to do it in the individual's home. And I just want it to be included in there because sometimes families don't want us to complete that in the home. And so they really like to see it in writing somewhere. And so if we could include it there, that would be much appreciated.
Sure. And I believe, Brian, not to put you on the spot, but I believe we have within the definition of the level of care screen, the requirements of whether or not it's in home, member choice, et cetera. Correct, Brian?
Yeah. So later on when we go through, it's in the, I don't know if it's in the rule necessarily, but it is in the case management contracts around the level of care screen that it's to be performed in the member's home. But there are those exceptions that are allowed based on, you know, member concerns, case management concerns around safety, health and welfare, what have you. I don't recall if it's necessarily in the rule because it is more of a contractual item.
Okay, I believe that is the last comment in the queue for now, Tiffany. Nicolette?
All right, we will keep going. Okay. So coming down here, we've just taken an old language out of the PMIP professional medical information page. And then instead of targeted group, we have targeted population for that targeted population criteria definition. And then we have some new language here for Transition Coordination Agency, or TCA, means a public or private, not-for-profit or for-profit agency that meets all applicable state and federal requirements and is certified by the department to provide transition coordination pursuant to a provider participation agreement with the State Department. And then for the legal basis, we have added in a statute. And that one was a quick and easy page. Is there any questions?
So we have you going, and if you want to type your name in the chat or raise your hand in the webinar, please go ahead. I am not seeing any hands raised or any names in the chat. If I'm missing them, I apologize.
Great, we'll keep on going. Oh, go ahead. We're good to go? All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for case management agency defined service areas, case management agency defined is that new language there. And to add on to this definition for those, members shall be provided case management services by the case management agency awarded the contract for their county of residence. Each case management agency shall have exceptions process and policy for serving members outside of their defined service area that shall be submitted to the department upon request in a method determined by the department and reviewed with the Community Advisory Committee and governing body at least once per contract period. Case management agencies shall coordinate transfer to a new case management agency in accordance with the transfer rules when a member in their defined service area completes the exception or grievance process and is transferred to a new case management agency outside of the member's county of residence. Case management agencies shall provide a report on their process and number of members served outside of their defined service area upon the department's request. So for this section, case management agency selection and contracting. Case management agency competitive procurement process. The department will follow all applicable requirements of the Colorado Procurement Code and its implementing regulations in statute for case management agency selection. And case management agency contract. We've just changed over some of that language to now always be case management agency throughout. Are there any questions?
Yes, this is Maureen on the phone.
Okay, Maureen, we have you in the queue. Anyone else on the phone?
While we're waiting for folks to raise hands, I just want to jump in and say Lori Ropa's question from earlier about how do people know how to who is serving them, and then how do they select a different person? That's not this section yet. This is just the defined service areas and what those entail. But we're getting to it.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with Michelle, then we will get to you, Maureen. Michelle, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think Tiffany actually just answered the question because I had the same one, was about choosing a different case management agency or the complaint and grievance process. So I will wait until we get to that.
Yeah, so that number one, so 4.1 is the agency shall have an exceptions process and policy for serving members outside of their defined service area. So more detail is of the exceptions process is in the grievance procedure.
Okay, thank you. Maureen Welch, go ahead, please. see a phone number on the screen. Maureen, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. This is Maureen Welch, and I'm concerned about this concept of lack of person-centered choice. I believe that the current status of being able to find another case management agency that's willing and able to serve a member is a way to provide person-centered choice. Requiring a member to file a grievance or an exception process puts the burden on the member. I have had cases recently of racial and anti-LGBTQ treatment, and these types of victims of mistreatment are loath to expose that in the public because of privacy. So I really don't like the idea of making a member prove that they prefer to be with a different case management agency, and I'm against this section completely. I think it should be similar in language to what we have now, in that if there is a willing and able case management agency to accept a member, that they have the person-centered choice and free will to move their case management services to another case management agency. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maureen. Appreciate your comments.
Thanks, Maureen. Is there anyone else for the queue?
And this will be our last question. I think we have time for one more question.
Very good. Nancy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Tiffany, can you clarify 4.1? You said that below there will be a description of the exceptions process, or will each case, I think that's a little, what if each case management agency's exception process is vastly different? I think that may cause confusion, but hopefully the exception process may clarify that.
Okay, your comment and concern is noted, and if it's not addressed in the grievance procedure, we'll make sure to align those.
Okay.
Thanks, Nancy.
Uh-huh.
All right, let's get into page 7. Okay, the case management agency, these just have some of those little changes again throughout to let everybody know that that's the language that we've changed to through these. So this one has some new language in it, so I'll just go ahead and read from 3. The case management agency may subcontract with individuals, for-profit entities, and not-for-profit entities to provide case management agency, targeted case management, and administrative case management activities up to the limitations established in case management agency contract. And here's that new language we'll get into. Subcontractors may abide by the terms of the case management agency contract with the department and these regulations, and are obligated to follow all applicable federal and state rules and regulations. The case management agency is responsible for subcontractor performance. And then here we again just put in those case management agencies, and then the section B, the case management agency shall fulfill all functions of a case management agency and case manager as described in these rules. And for more of the case management agency shall, and we just added in the LTSS, and then number 3, be separated from the delivery of direct services and supports paid for by any payer for the same individual they provide case management, unless otherwise provided by the department through a conflict-free case management waiver and in accordance with statute. The case management agency may be granted a conflict-free case management waiver by the department to provide direct services and case management in the event that no other willing and qualified providers are available for the capacity of member services necessary. Applications for this waiver shall be received and evaluated in the manner in which has become communicated by the department. The CMA, Case Management Agency, may be granted a conflict-free case management waiver, formerly known as a rule exception, by the department to provide specific direct services within their defined service area to ensure access to these services in rural and frontier areas across Colorado. The CMA, or Case Management Agency, will need to comply with the following, and then I'll just read through this and then we'll stop for questions. The Case Management Agency shall submit a formal application found on the department website for a conflict-free case management waiver. The Case Management Agency shall receive formal notifications from the department via email of the receipt of the application within 10 days. The department will notify applicants of their approval or denial within 90 days of receipt of the application. I'm sorry, this one will go through a whole other page. Are we good to go or okay? A, if the applicant submits a response to the CMA request for proposal, the department will notify the agency of approval or denial prior to the delivery of intent to award letters to RFP respondents. If the conflict-free case management waiver application is denied, the department will coordinate with the CMA for a transition period if necessary. If a CMA requires a waiver between CMA contract cycles, the CMA must submit the application for the conflict-free case management waiver and maintain the documentation for the next RFP submission. If the conflict-free case management waiver application is approved, the department will coordinate with the CMA for next steps in implementing and execution if necessary. If the conflict-free case management waiver application is denied, the department will coordinate with the CMA for transition period within their contract period, if necessary. A CMA that is granted a conflict-free case management waiver shall provide an annual report to the department subject to department approval that includes, but is not limited to, a summary of individuals participating in the direct services and case management, how the CMA can ensure informed consent or choice if other providers exit in the defined service area, and how the CMA continues to support the recruitment of willing and qualified providers in their catchment area. The direct service provider functions and CMA functions must be administratively separated, including staff with safeguards in place to ensure discussion between direct services and case management exists. I can't say that, my mouth is getting so dry, I'm sorry. Exists as a protection against conflict of interest. If a new service provider or ERS become available in the area, the CMA may continue to provide direct services until the department has determined that the alternative provider is capable of meeting all needs in that service area. There's two more pieces to this section that I will just finish up with. If other service providers are available in the area, the case manager must document the offering of choice of provider in the care and case management IT system. To ensure conflict of interest is being mitigated by the CMA, the department will conduct annual quality reviews that will include, but not limited to, reviews of documentation of provider choice and informed consent for services. All right, that one was a longer one. We are ready for questions.
Okay, thanks. This is John. We have some people in the queue. If anyone wants to add by unmuting your phone and giving me your name. If you're on the phone only, you can do that.
And while folks are
okay.
getting in the queue, sorry.
Go ahead, Kidron, thanks.
Okay, perfect. While folks are hopping on the queue, I wanted to just take a second. We've already had a couple of comments about the process or our suggestions to how members could request a case management agency outside of their designated service area. And I saw some comments in the chat as well. So I just wanted to speak to that because we do hear loud and clear that the process needs to be person-centered. We do not want any additional added burden for members to be able to have a request for a new case management agency. Our language that we've suggested as a starting point is to start to outline what that process might look like. The process itself, I want to be clear, our plan is not to operationalize that by saying only members with grievances are eligible to ask for a different case management agency. Again, we want it to be person-centered. We want to take into careful consideration those parameters where a member would ask for a different case management agency. Through our process, grievance about their current case management agency will be included because we want to afford members choice if things are not working well for them. And then, obviously having our exceptions process in addition to requesting a case management agency due to a grievance that cannot be resolved will be part of our way to operationalize members the ability to request a new case management agency outside their designated service agency. So I just wanted to clarify that really quickly, that we do hear that loud and clear. It needs to be person-centered, member-centric, and more than one way in which that can be accomplished.
This is Maureen. I have a follow-up comment.
Okay, Maureen, we have you in the queue. Thanks. Sherry, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Sherry Rapinski, Rocky Mountain Human Services. I may be missing this, but I think my comment is specific to C3 around the prohibition of delivering direct services and supports. It's understood that the CMA contracts will include a requirement to perform duties under the organized healthcare delivery system, which by its definition require the purchase of HCBS direct services. And as this is written, it doesn't appear to give the authority for that function as it's written right now for the actual purchase of HCBS direct services through the OHCDS.
Great, thanks for calling that out, Sherry. We'll make a note and take that back to the team.
Okay, Abby, you are up next.
Thank you. I cannot figure out how to raise my hand. I apologize, but I just wanted to follow up and reiterate someone, I forget her name, but the point about the grievance process. And I know you're hearing a theme, but I just want to maybe put a different spin on it. I am a parent of a complex child, someone that would need kind of more of that boutique service, that real hands-on, hopefully, continued case management or that option. So I'm hopeful, but I wanted to just make the comment to give you an example of what we're talking about. I know you guys are going to have a great appeal process and grievance. I have no doubt, and I think you're doing the right thing. You're trying to do the right thing, but I want to make one last point is that my son switched to Kaiser when he had Medicaid. My ex-husband got a job with the city, and he switched over to Kaiser, and I documented hours, like over 40 hours a week. I was on the phone with the right people, the special care coordinators, and it was such a mess because even the simplest things that he needs every day were getting appealed. And it was, I had to get an exception from like the president of the company to let me out of this because it was not serving him. And they actually made an exception and he went back to Medicaid. And I'm telling you, I can see it, I can feel it for our kids, for that special population. We're going to be back, I'm going to be doing that again. And it's not, I'm not trying to be negative, it's just our reality. So please take it to heart. Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. Appreciate your comment.
Thanks, Abby. So Maureen Welch. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that is definitely something that is on our minds too at the department as we look at these transitions.
Okay, thank you.
Hi,
Maureen,
John.
go
This
ahead.
is Pat Chamberlain. I'd like to be in the queue.
You are in the queue. Thanks. Maureen, go ahead.
Yes, this is Maureen Welch. I just don't understand why you are doing this. It's a step backwards in choice. And these are supposed to be progressive updates to our rules and regulations, and to require a parent who's already overwhelmed. I appreciated the comment from the last parent. I'm a parent myself and an advocate. It's unreasonable to put another burden on individuals who are members and also their families. We need to keep the status quo of allowing a member to find a willing and able CMA agency who will accept them. I don't understand why you are making life harder. This needs to be changed and removed, and just use the current process that we have now. Don't fix it if it's not broke.
Yes, we are already maxed out. This is just.
Thank you both. Pat, you're up next.
Well, I'd just like to chime in with the same theme. I think that was just said very well, and I totally agree. And I think what we're failing to see sometimes is the really complex cases that by necessity have few options. For instance, people who live in northern Colorado and have an adult child that's sent to one of the regional centers. And after leaving the regional centers, as you all know, the options are slim for placement. And then the person has a case management that was where they were living as a home and a family. Then when they go to the regional center, they get some kind of other case management. Then when they're released, they have very few options for placement, have to change again. And the higher needs people tend to not often be placed in a stable environment. They're the ones that are changing, that are challenging. They go in and out of the hospital, whatever hospital will take them, and it's just a mess. So it absolutely is a step backwards for those individuals that need it the most to be able to choose their organizations, to choose their case management, and that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you,
Thank
Pat,
you all
and
for your comments. I know that this topic of case management agency choice is a hot topic. I will just remind everyone here, the department has been working on this policy and how Colorado would come into compliance with conflict-free case management for 10 years. There have been at least 2 iterations that I know of options that have been proposed, attempted, tried. Ultimately, this is where stakeholders who worked with HCPF leadership landed for this iteration. That is not to say that there could not be more evolution as we move forward, but our priorities right now are on getting case management agencies that can offer quality and consistency to members moving forward that are in compliance with our conflict-free requirements from the federal government. So we will be talking more about this in other webinars, so we can document this as an issue for further discussion. And we will put in that log some other opportunities for you to engage with this topic and to hear from our HCPF leadership and about how we got here, all of the other options that were explored and why Colorado landed where it did. It was not without robust stakeholder feedback and input. And it is complicated to implement a full state system. So we are taking that feedback and taking all of the contingencies possible for choice and making sure that people are matched with a case manager that meets their needs, that addresses their concerns, that is person-centered, while also kind of operating within the constraints that we have from an authority perspective. So we are at 10:45 and excuse me, I believe we are we at the end of page 8? Is that right, Nicolette?
Yes.
Or beginning of page 9?
Yep, we're end of page 8. Yeah, then it would be getting into page 9, sorry.
Okay.
End of page 9, getting into 10.
We can go ahead and do the governing body section that's in blue, and then we'll take 3 questions about that, and then we will wrap up.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so governing body, case management agency governing body. Each case management agency shall have a governing body that complies with the requirements in the statute. All meeting agendas, minutes, and documents that are required to be posted on the CMA's website must be maintained on the website for at least 3 months after posting. All contracts, financial statements, and 990s that are required to be posted on the CMA's website must be maintained on the website for at least 3 calendar years after posting. Any email that is sent to a member of the board of directors or governing body of a CMA shall not be filtered by an employee of the CMA. The CMA shall ensure that all emails addressed to a member of the board of directors or governing body are provided to that member. In the event that a member of the board of directors or governing body is unable to access a computer or needs assistance with email, the CMA shall provide appropriate assistance, including providing emails in alternative formats upon request or mailing correspondence through the U.S. Postal Service. The department will maintain a website from a website form allowing for community members to make anonymous complaints regarding the case management agency compliance with the transparency requirements in statute. The CMA and its governing bodies shall comply with and follow department follow-up procedures for all complaints as requested by the department. The case management agency governing body function shall include, but not limited to, financial oversight and solvency, ensuring accountability and the provision of high-quality case management, ensuring a working community advisory committee, covenants at least quarterly, resolving disputes between clients, members, and case management agencies that are elevated to the governing body, developing and presenting the long-range plan annually to the department, ensuring adherence to all state and federal regulations and contractual obligations and requirements. And from here, we can take 3 questions.
Okay, thank you. So folks, again, this is John. Please give me your name. We have Elsa and Lori so far. Thank you. You can raise your hand in the webinar. And
Maureen Welch on the phone, please.
Or in the queue, Maureen, thank you. You can go to the reactions tab at the bottom, click that open, and then within that, you will see a number of options that you can do. One of them is raise hand. That's how that is done. Sorry that it's a 2-step process. Okay, waiting to see if there's any hands raised in the webinar. Okay. let's begin with Elsa.
Trying to find my unmute. Sorry, I think my question was about who, when somebody does wish to change or retain a CMA, say they're moving location, how and who is going to make that decision? It sounds like you were describing a person-centered process. So I'm assuming it involves the person as being part of arriving at a collaborative decision. But I know that you're still writing this, but you know, how do you see that happening, and who actually makes the final decision?
I want to say that this is in our transfer rules. So I don't know, Kidron, if you remember off the top of your head.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that. So thank you for the question. I think it's important to ask for clarification. So thanks for that. But we do in our transition section that we have built out. We've got a formal step-by-step process of how we would envision that at this point. Our rules in general, when it relates to transitions between case management agencies, had a lot of work. So we had bits and pieces through other rules, what a single entry points and community-centered boards, how they operationalize transitions, et cetera, really were different, and we needed to streamline that and make sure that we had a really good process and really effective outlined process for members to be able to do that. So yes, that is within the definitions that we tried to build out in the transitions section. So I don't think we'll get to that today, but there will be opportunity to view that section and to give feedback about that approach. Ultimately, our vision is that depending on if it's just somebody moving from the designated service area or having that type of transition, or whether or not the transition is requested because of a grievance, we envision a process where the department would be involved in making that approval. Again, and I know there's been some comments about burden for families or members. You know, we want a process that's not burdensome, but ultimately that the vision is for the department to make that decision.
Okay, thank you, Kidron. So I think we have one more, Maureen Welch. Go ahead, please.
Yes, this is Maureen Welch. Thank you. I appreciate the comments about the addressing of the continuity of care. I think someone brought up the fact that there is a lot of mobility, especially with cost of living. And if an individual is pleased with their case management agency when they live in Denver and then they move out to Eastern Arapahoe County, I feel that they should be able to make the individual choice to stay with the agency that is serving them best. I also wanted to make a comment on page 9. I appreciate all of the details about the governing body. I would encourage the department to reference section 25.5, 10-209. And this is in regards to the changes that were made with Senate Bill 16038 regarding transparencies of community center boards. There's a lot of language in the statute that was passed with that bill that are missing from this section. For example, it has very specific numbers of days posting the meeting prior to a governing body meeting. So I'd encourage the department to pull up that section and look at Senate Bill 16038, because we need to make sure that the legislative intent of transparency is transferred over to these new case management entities. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Appreciate that.
Maureen, so we have time for one more comment in the queue, if there is one. Thanks everyone for your written comments in the chat. Anyone else for the queue? Hey, I don't see any, not hearing anyone. Let's see. Nope. I think that's it for now, Nicolette and Tiffany.
Okay, sounds good. We appreciate everyone's participation today. Really appreciate all the comments and the very robust discussion. We will be back here in 2 weeks to complete this this document. We will also add sections after this one for us to review for case management agency responsibilities, and then we'll get into case manager roles and responsibilities. So any updates to the meeting schedule you can find on our website. Nicolette has put that into the chat. And with that, we will see you all in a couple of weeks. Feel free to email me or Nicolette if you have any questions or concerns. In the meantime, we will put our emails in the chat here before we leave. Thanks, everyone.
Tiffany?
Yes.
Sorry, I threw a last minute question in the chat, not pertaining to any of this, but is there a way for future meetings to access the revisions, the draft revisions, so folks can read them beforehand? Are they posted?
Yes, they are posted 1 week in advance of this meeting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. If you've made a comment, please make sure that you check the listening log and that we have captured that accurately. If not, please email Steve and he will make that update. So thank you all.